Welcome everyone to our third part of the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Soil Health Workshop Series. It's been really fun having everyone join us and lots of great knowledge being shared by farmers and service providers. Today we're gonna, I just wanna pause with a acknowledgement of the land that we're farming on. I'm on unceded Abenaki territory and just feel a lot of gratitude for the land and farming in the time we're in. So just a moment of thinking about that. Moving on to today, we've got a pretty exciting lineup. It's a bit of a new topic for me to think about, but I know last week as all the presenters were talking, I just kept thinking to myself, what does this cost and what's the economic balance of these decisions? How does that play out for the farmers? So today we're going to try to address that. We've got some really gracious farmers sharing some of the inside picture of their farm operations on very different levels. So I'm really grateful. It's a tough one to tackle and kind of a new topic. And also really grateful Betsy Miller and Zach Smith, who are the UVM, work with the UVM Extension Ag Business Team. And they work specifically with vegetable farmers and also do a lot with water quality. So they're going to start out getting things going, and then we're going to have the farmers here share. Ryan from Naked Acre Farm, John from Bare Roots Farm, and Hilary from Mirth. And then we should have plenty of time for discussion. Put your questions in the chat as things go, and we'll try to address them. And also, there is an evaluation that I will email out and also post in the chat if you can complete it as we're going through the meetings. I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. Zach or Betsy, if you want to hop on.
Thanks, Becky. I'll take it first, Zach, and then you can do your intro. I'm Betsy Miller, and I work with the Ag Business Group at UVM Extension, as Becky said. I do a lot of work with farm viability business planning, which, if you don't know, it's a 2-year business planning process where we basically do a lot of financial analysis and risk management analysis and really digging into the farm business and where they want to go and goal setting and helping farmers to get where they want to go. In the last couple of years, I've been involved in 2 different projects that centered around conservation practices and specifically the economic impact of those practices. And I'm hoping to share a little bit about what I learned with that today, but we'll get to that later, and I can hand it off to Zach.
Yep, I'm Zach Smith. I work with Betsy in the Ag Biz program. Pre-COVID, I was out of the St. Albans office, but I work throughout the state. So I work in farm viability, and I also work in our Clean Water Initiative program. And I also work in a variety of applications that we're developing online, making everything from digital marketing to some upcoming transfer and succession planning, as well as some feasibility study work.
Great. So I think, are you guys ready for us just to jump right over to Ryan? Cool. So Ryan, do you want to do your screen share again? And Brian, John, and Hilary are all going to present, and then Zach and Betsy are going to help support the conversation kind of during and after their presentations from the business perspective. So there you go, Ryan. That
all right.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I got a lot of stuff. I kind of went a little overboard, so hopefully I'll run through it as quick as I can.
That's great. And maybe if you want me to do a little farm introduction or you want to do it, tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're farming.
Yeah, I got that on the second slide there. But first, I wanted to start by just giving a shout out and thanking all the folks that have just helped me along the way from starting a farm business. I don't really know where I'd be without all the people at the extension office, especially Vern and Becky. They've really helped me since the very beginning, and they've helped kind of shape our whole farm. So thank you guys. So I am Naked Acre Farm. I have about 2.5 acres of organic vegetable production. Next year, or this coming year, I'll talk a little more about this, but there's going to be 5 acres with cover crop. Jenica, my wife and I bought raw land about 3 years ago. It was no driveway, no electric, no water, nothing. So we've just kind of really developed it from the ground up. My business is just me and a part-time employee, 16 to 20 hours a week. I think that's going to go up this year because I need the help for sure. So we have 2 businesses on the property. There's Homefront Gardens, which is Jenica's business. She's going to talk a little bit about that later on. And then my business. And so we kind of make land decisions together on the property, but have 2 separate kind of entities that work together on the property. And I do CSA wholesale restaurants. I have about 1/3 of an acre undercover in high tunnels. And I leased 2 different places in Waterbury before finding this property with Jenica. So this is going to be kind of a wordy slide, but I'll run through it as quick as possible. So I'm a young, I say young because I'm 40 and I found farming later in life in my mid-30s. I did the farmer training program at UVM and then just kind of jumped in on leased land in Waterbury. So that means I knew very little and I'm kind of learning all the aspects of soil health and equipment and stuff as I go. One of the biggest things that I've encountered over the 8 years is the short game, long game. That's kind of something I talk about a lot is like the leased land with very little knowledge starting out is a short game, not knowing really anything like what is soil, and just all the different equipment, things that I need. And then moving into land ownership with more knowledge, it's more of a long game, thinking about relationships with soil and the land around us. And then within that short game, long game is kind of the raw land, how to build soils and kind of beat up the soils in the beginning, and then trying to be considerate about maintaining a long-term soil health too that we came into. And then in the beginning, it's just been a scramble the first couple of years trying to build infrastructure and get the soil in really good quality and also maintaining 2 previously existing businesses and coming together to make decisions. And this past year, we've kind of seen a light at the end of the tunnel. So we can kind of shift our focus towards more of long-term goals and relationship with the land and soil health and working on those kinds of things that we've been working together with Becky on. So the journey continues. The long game that I was talking about is informed by learning, reading, working with Vernon and Becky, observation, talking to seasoned growers. Didn't necessarily know how to set goals because I didn't really know much about soil, much about soil health and things like that. And then all the reading and observation, it kind of it provides the knowledge to make these decisions for the long game. And it seems like all the old timers always bring it back to soil. And so that obviously seems like a very important thing then in the decision-making process. So the long game has kind of changed my relationship with money. In the beginning, I didn't have a lot of money, and so I used to cheap out on different supplies and things, but obviously seen the benefit of having good working equipment. It ends up costing less in the end. And then you can, have specific equipment that you need for different tasks. And now that the business is more established and successful, I can kind of afford to purchase the things that I need and want for specific jobs. So our soil structure here, we have a Berkshire fine sandy loam. It's most of it's prime ag or statewide importance. The first soil test said it was about 8% organic matter, and so we've been really trying to maintain that and find the balance of developing new soil, but also maintaining that high organic matter. So after 3 years of tilling, it's about the last soil test we did was about 6 or 7%, which is I thought still pretty good for not adding too much to it yet. We have some challenges on the property with high water table and ledge, rocks of all different sizes from small to boulders, and some wet spots, especially in the spring, obviously. So we came into high organic matter, but low fertility. The structure, as you can see down there on the right, is really great. But I'm kind of confused and still learning about if we have such high organic matter, why the fertility would be so low, and kind of working with Becky on how to move forward to increase fertility. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The structure, I think it's really beautiful and nice and dark, and you can see down there. And then on the plant there's actually some really healthy flea beetles too that are, they don't seem to care that I'm there. But so this past year, I did a lot of work with Becky. Previous to 2020, I was using all bagged fertilizer, peanut meals, feather meals, Creers, some ProGrow, and that was everywhere. That was in the houses, that was in the field, and even on smaller acreage, it was expensive for what it was. So I decided to get some loads of Giroux and wood ash based on the recommendations of working with Becky, and there's some numbers for you there. One truckload of Giroux is enough for about 2 seasons, so it ends up being about $550 per season, which is pretty minimal. The wood ash at 900, I can use, the recommendations I worked with Becky was about 4 acres or 4 tons per acre Giroux, 1 ton per acre of wood ash. And so the load of wood ash will last a long time, and I'm probably going to end up using a little more in the new fields to just kind of bring up pH. We have pH around 6, and so we want to bring that up a little bit. And then in the tunnels, I don't use the wood ash or the Giroux just because of salt. Becky's recommended that salt reduction in the house is probably a good idea. So I stick with the bagged fertilizers there. A blood meal, feather meal mix for the quick and slow release nitrogen, bone meal for phosphorus, and sulfate of potash, which is about 2/3 granular and 1/3 soluble for that quick and slow release potassium. And this is one of Becky's slides that I stole. We did kind of a cost breakdown, and doing the Giroux and the wood ash obviously is significantly less per acre from a cost standpoint than doing the 50-pound bags. So, and on my scale, it's like I said, about 2.5 acres. So it's not a huge cost to have all the fertility I need going that Giroux wood ash route. And then the evolution of my kind of equipment from starting on the leased land, I started about 1/2 acre in Waterbury. And so the tools I needed were pretty minimal, which was great because I didn't have a whole lot of money anyway, so I could do a lot of stuff by hand. Then I ended up getting an FSA microloan for a bunch of different things, but I bought a BCS that was wrapped into it, kind of going on that market garden model, like the 1/2 acre, acre and a half model with BCS. But there were some shortcomings with it. It's when we moved to the property, it was all in sod. Obviously, it was a field of pasture, and it's definitely not good for breaking up sod, and it's not great if you're doing more than like 1.5 acres, I found, but it is really good for the houses. So I still use it for prepping and incorporating inside the tunnels and houses. And with that BCS, I used to just hire out the rototilling in the spring. So then when we did move to the property, I ended up finding a used Kuhn rototiller, which has been super helpful for breaking up that sod that BCS struggled with and creating finer seed beds. You know, you can watch a field of green kind of turn into a nice seed bed. And also you can hit row cover. That's what I have done a bunch of times with that thing. It does need a tractor, obviously, which is a bigger expense. And it's tough on the soil. So, you know, we're trying to move away from tilling, but it's a good thing to kind of keep in the back pocket and have if you need it for something. If, you know, we still are struggling with a lot of quackgrass and perennial grasses. So it's nice to kind of have that to break that stuff up. And then, so this year, kind of in that effort to move away from the rototiller, I have like a mini chisel coming from Everything Attachments. I don't know if you've seen any of these videos, but I love this guy. He's really great. They have some awesome videos there. So it's $1,000 new and shipped, and it's just kind of a different way to work the soil. And I'm going to be using that with a bed shaper to create seed beds. But I can, like I said, still till if I need to, or I have a like a springtime field cultivator that works as well. So one of the biggest challenges coming up to this year was trying to figure out what to buy, what's best for the land. Being in 3 different locations in 7 years, there's different demands of the fields, and so it's been, excuse me, kind of a challenge to figure out what's best to buy with a lack of knowledge. So moving into the future, this past year, this fall, I was able to turn over about 2 new acres. I've been really inspired by the Nordell model. They seem to be kind of a similar size scale, about that, you know, 3-acre size of cash crop anyway. And the goal is to be able to just take about half out of production each year to work on fertility through cover cropping, some bare fallow stuff, and the main goal is weed suppression, because the weeds just been really challenging since we got here 3 years ago. I think increasing fertility and doing weed suppression is the main goals for me anyway. And then the issue is that it's the rotation plan. I kind of am often envious of the folks that have big, beautiful squares and rectangles that they can work with. So we are limited by a lot of land features and some slopes, you know, ledge and certain wet spots. And so our fields are kind of oddly shaped. And so it's going to be a little bit of an intricate field plan, a rotation plan to, you know, pull things out and get the right amount of land out and in every year. So again, the main goal being we'd like to reduce off-farm fertilizers, with the exception of cover crop seed, and try to support more of bring things in locally as best that we can. And from a cost perspective, it seems that you know, the upfront cost of equipment and seed and compost, it's a high cost in the beginning, but it seems to balance out in the end, especially if you're not spending time weeding as much and you have fewer inputs, you know, bagged inputs that you need to bring into the soil. And then just thinking about tracking the progress, basically, I don't necessarily have any record keeping like per se, but I think just using the kind of pest and disease issues and the plant health and yields as a kind of an indicator for how things are going in the soil is where I'm at right now. So I'd like to pass it off to Jenica, Homefront Gardens, finally.
I'll come out of the kale here. Something that I'm a gardener is my main business, and I kind of grow on the side, coming from a background in a small commercial annual and perennial model of sales. So growing in the soil is somewhat new to me versus growing in containers. And as a gardener, I think about ecosystems a lot. So one of the things we're trying to work with is using the on-site materials like some nettles and other plants to actually start making some of our own compost and compost teas to help just with the microbial support in the soils. And I got a dream tool this fall, a wood chipper, to start working with mulches on different perennial crops that I'm starting to work with more as a nursery production versus annual crops that Ryan is working on. So long term, we really want to work with that weed suppression in multiple ways, not just with the cover crops and soil building, but also with the mulching and being able to maybe do some more on-farm experiments and tracking and actually making sure that we take notes versus using our memories to in photos to just remember what may have happened and be a little more intentional about that tracking method. Yeah.
So the ultimate goal is, I think, getting the soil structure to a place to just really aid in soil biology, being able to thrive, and ultimately reducing labor and inputs. That would be the ultimate goal. But the truly ultimate goal is kind of working with the soil so that we don't have to work as much doing weeding, things like that. So that's all I got.
That's great, you guys. Thank you both for sharing. I don't see any questions for you right now. So let's pop right over to John unless I see questions show up. John, do you want to, I'm gonna stop your screen sharing and share mine, share some slides for John. And sounds like you're unmuted. So you can just talk away, John, and tell me when to switch slides.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So I'm John Wagner. We have Bare Roots Farm, my wife Karen and I, and I guess we've been farming since 2010. We moved up to Vermont in 2013, and we purchased our farm in Barrie 2014. And that property is 87 acres. It has about 25 tillable acres, depending on who you talk to. It's definitely got some contours and some rocks and some wet spots. And anyways, we were pretty happy to get it at the time, and we started out, I think, doing about 8 acres tilled in vegetables, and our main focus, I think, at first was trying to get our cover cropping dialed in. So we had the benefit of getting that all tilled up and cover cropped the year before we got onto the land. I think that helped us a lot in year one, just with weeds and soil fertility. But we were working with an old hayfield, and so we did run into a lot of weed issues. And after year one, we saw productivity drop quite a bit. We were using, I think, a lot of ProGrow, and we were getting in wood ash from New Hampshire, and we might have limed a little bit, but those were our primary nutrient additives. And I don't know, we were finding we were running into, our growth was pretty quick, and we were running into issues with disease and pests after year 3, really. And our fertility didn't really seem like it was keeping up with the tillage we were doing. So we ended up getting another farm 7 miles down the road in Williamstown, and that's kind of become our primary location now. We now live here, and we've kind of transitioned our whole business over here. And now we have the berry farm where we've been resting it for 3 years and just cover cropping it. We've put down some perennial cover crops, including ryegrass, perennial ryegrass, clover, and vetch, and a couple of other things. And we're doing the same thing over here in Williamstown, where we have about 90 tillable acres. It's a little flatter than Barry, a few less rocks. The organic matter is a little higher. I think it is about 5%, 6%, whereas the organic matter in Barry was about 3%, started pretty low. But we've really got a head start over here now, and we have about, I think, 35, 40 acres in cover crop every year. We're trying to get up to 60 and have a 4-year rotation where we can really just have fields resting for 4 years and then till them 1 year, maybe 2, and then put them back to rest for another 3 to 4 years. And so right now we've got 12 acres going over here, and we're basically just cover cropping. We're putting down the wood ash, and we're putting down the poultry compost from Drew's. So I think Becky, you said you had done a slide on that with the numbers that we had worked out a little while back. Yep.
Is that it?
Yeah. So I think that's roughly what it ended up being. I think we've just been doing the wood ash and the Drew's and not the lime, but part of that's just been because by the time we get out there and we're tilling, it's too early for the truck to come in with the lime. But I think next year will be our first year where we're just liming everything ahead of time and getting that done early, so it's ready for the next year. This system's worked really well for us. It's really just hammered our pest and disease issues. We're seeing very little. Weed control is pretty good. We're not having to do a whole lot of weeding. Yeah, it's the vegetables that are coming out of the soil. It's shocking. So, yeah, I think our numbers roughly are we're grossing 22,000 per acre with this system, and it's been going well the last couple of years. We're still kind of like evolving every year. I think we're a little low in magnesium now, or sorry, potassium. And so we're looking to increase that a little bit, but overall, yeah, no, it's been good. I think one of the issues we've run into is with the weather. We've been seeing some issues with it's either too hot, too dry. We're losing. Sometimes I'm just standing out there and it's, like this summer, 90 degrees and you haven't had rain in 2 weeks and you're just seeing the soil blow away off the top. So we're trying to figure out a system where we can try to keep the soil covered in some capacity, whether it's row covers and plastic mulch, which I hate to use, but I've found that having just anything on the surface of the soil really benefits a lot. And eventually it would be nice to use some mulch, like some straw crop to put down, and that's a whole nother investment in terms of equipment to get it all hayed up, and then a bale chopper to lay it out. But yeah, I guess our next phase is kind of trying to dial in our equipment and get it so we're not wasting space in between tire tracks. We're trying to get some higher profile tires on our tractors and get our cultivators more dialed in. We've invested in some basket weeders, and we're looking at a couple of cultivating tractors. Like I know Tillmore makes one, and there's a couple of others out there. We've had the Farmall Cubs for a couple of years, and I find they're usually broken when you need them. Let's see, I have a question here that just popped up. Oh, so we're applying all of our compost using a spreader. So it's a fairly simple system, but you do need 2 tractors and a spreader, one with the loader on it. The wood ash source, let's see what we got here. Place in New Hampshire.
Resource management, I think.
Resource management, or MIR or something like that. Is there?
I can share the source in the chat if in a few
Okay.
minutes. I think it was Michael Potash you were working with, right? I'm not sure if he's still
Yeah,
the guy,
it's
but
Michael Potash.
never.
I don't think he's around anymore. I think he moved on to something other than Potash.
Ah, too bad.
It's unfortunate. Can you share? Yeah. So yeah, that's our source. I think Acela, I had heard, also does wood ash locally. They have an organic approved wood ash. I called them last year, and they said they weren't doing it, but then I heard from someone else that they were. So I don't know. I think you have to just talk to the right person, because it's a little more specialized for them, and their main garbage branch might not be familiar with it. So that's my source, and then obviously Drew's for the compost, and we also use Laws Ag for our ProGrow alternative. They tend to be a little cheap.
Yeah.
Also Omri approved, and they have a couple of other options as well. And then for cover crop seed,
What are you saying? I'm sorry. 3 times I couldn't understand what you.
Sorry, you can't hear me?
No, I'm all right. Sorry.
For cover crop, we're using Lakeview Organics. We're getting most of our stuff from there. That's basically our sources. That's any other things I should be covering here?
That's great, John. I mean, I think just to kind of frame this for everybody in the audience, I thought it was really interesting to juxtapose like John and Karen and Ryan and Jenica, because you're both about the same age of farm, but your scale is really different. But in both cases, it's these pieces of land that are kind of inherently low in fertility, and the cost of getting those fields up, I think, is a big challenge. And I know, like, when I first was working with John and Karen, we were like running some numbers, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, but you're looking at like what, 30 acres or 20 acres that first year you wanted to get up to production level for fertility.
Mm-hmm.
So that really limits the options. Whereas if it's 1 acre, like, sure, any bagged amendment is kind of affordable-ish. But when you're looking at 20 acres that are low in phosphorus and potassium and micronutrients, that really kind of honed us in on using some form of manure-based product that's local. And then the wood ash was a really affordable source of potassium. So, and Ryan and Jenica were in sort of the same boat, even on just 4 acres, a new farm on 4 acres. To be able to spend close to $1,500 or $2,000 an acre really seemed prohibitive. And again, I think this might be stating the obvious, but phosphorus, when it's low, allows the use of something like the Giroux or even the Carreras. But keeping an eye on those phosphorus levels. And once they get to a certain point, both of you guys are going to have to think about transitioning to a source of nitrogen that's not linked to phosphorus. And that is going to be more expensive. But the cover cropping, all these practices you're building right now, the cover crops, the legumes are really going to support that in the long run. So I just think what both of you are doing is really thinking ahead and really impressive. So we might have another question here before we switch over to Hilary. Someone says, wood ash same as SOP? I don't know, David, what's SOP? You can unmute yourself if you want.
Am I muted still?
Nope.
No, okay. Oh, how do we seed sunflowers? We're just using a cone spreader, and those sunflowers I seeded with white clover. So basically, the sunflowers take over in year one, and then I mow them, and the white clover comes up underneath and has a pretty nice even spread the following year. So that's kind of like something we were experimenting with this year. Worked out pretty nice. The neighbors liked it, and our CSA was able to come out and, kind of jump in there and take pictures and harvest some flowers. I think we seeded them mid-June, I would say, maybe a little later than that, but not too much later. As soon as we are clear of the last frost, we would try to get that in. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking.
Oh, thank you, John.
Yeah, were there any other thoughts, or I could talk a little bit about my cover cropping, like specifics. I have I typically just go with Austrian winter peas, oats, and rye, and I'll plant those at different times depending on when I'm looking to use that field. So if I'm going into the fall, I might do an oat, rye, peas mix if I'm planning to do like a midsummer planting of that field the following year, or I'll do just oats and peas if I'm planning to hit that field first thing in the spring the following year. But fairly simple. And then I'm always trying to experiment with other cover crops like the sunflowers. That was the first thing for us last year. So we'll see. We'll see if it knocks back the weeds and if the soil seems like it's improving with organic matter from it. But a lot of material there.
Yeah, and I was just going to say anecdotally, like I think I stopped by your farm in September this past year after I don't think you had rain for like 3 months pretty much. And I mean, the crops were like I remember things looked a little limp, but they were making it, and without irrigation, right? You don't really have irrigation.
No irrigation.
There.
And yeah, it's shocking that I mean, that was kind of like the theory. You're planning for the worst case scenario, and you see year after year these pretty extreme conditions where it's just like rain for weeks or no rain for weeks and super windy. We're in a pretty windy spot up here. And when you have wind and it's 80, 90 degrees for weeks without rain, like you just need that soil structure. You need to be able to hold moisture in the soil, or I don't even think it would really matter if we had irrigation because it dries out so quick on the surface, it just would evaporate. But yeah, we're really limited on our water sources up here. So that for long term, it would be nice to invest in that, having some ponds or some wells around the farm, but we're pretty spread out. We're not in like one location. We have fields all over the place. So it's pretty difficult to have a decent irrigation setup.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, John. I'm looking forward to the conversation attached to costs in a few minutes, but I'm going to let Hilary hop on,
Sure.
offering the perspective of a older farm, I guess we would say. Hilary, do you want to screen share?
Hi, everybody. Hello again to many of you. I presented a couple weeks ago, so some of this will be, there'll be some repetitive information, but hopefully we can kind of breeze through some of that and get into discussion a little bit later. So my name is Hilary. I'm from Mirth Collective Farm, and how do I want to get that. Well, maybe it doesn't matter. Are these interrupting my screen here? My slides or no? Okay, great. So we are certified organic, and we have we manage about 13 acres in the Inner Vale in Burlington, and we grow mixed vegetables. We're a market farm, selling mostly to stores and a couple restaurants and 2 farmers markets. And yeah, our farm started in 1992. So generally we have about 8 acres in vegetables every year and 4 acres in cover crop. So we're cover cropping about a third of each of our 3 fields every year. We grow much of what we grow, about 50% of our wholesale. Our wholesale is kind of the bulk of what we do, and about half of that is in salad greens. So we do a lot of quick crops, crops that are in the ground for 3 or 4 weeks, a lot of annual herbs that are in the ground for like 6 weeks. And then a smattering of other various vegetables, root crops, and other things. There's definitely more diversity in what we bring to the farmers market. And so sort of like our general approach to soil health has been something like this. As I said, we have this very simple cover cropping system, kind of 2/3 vegetables, 1/3 cover crops. We generally are cover cropping, the land in cover crop is only for cover crop. At the some of our vegetable fields in any given year will have a little bit of cover cropping in the spring or in the fall. We try not to have too much just sort of like bare open land, but generally we're focusing our cover cropping on sort of like one part of the farm at any time. We focus we've kind of tried to have inexpensive amendments that have just like a simple and broad application. So that means like we amend, we do some side dressing as needed, but for the most part, we're trying to, open up blocks of our fields and sort of spread on them all at one time, mostly in the spring or the early summer, to prep the beds, to prep the soil for the vegetable planting to come. And we generally treat all of the different fields in the same way, regardless of what vegetables are going in, mostly because we don't have a huge diversity of vegetables that we're growing. And so they see about the same kinds of vegetables. Over the years, we've been trying to reduce tillage where we can. And then more recently, we've been, we kind of started experimenting with tarping a few years ago, and we've moved to tarping all of our beds and have seen a lot of benefits with that, and then I'll talk about that a little later. So I'm just gonna kind of go into each one of those kind of sections. So cover cropping is really important to us. It's something that we focus, well, I would say, you know, we're very devoted to cover cropping. However, we honestly haven't really used cover cropping for like targeted fertility as much as making sure the soil is covered, making sure that weeds are smothered, and really trying to increase the organic matter. Our organic matter's low at like around 2-ish, like most river bottom soils and sandy soils. So we don't have a lot of organic matter in the soil. So we're always, you know, trying to do what we can to bulk up that soil with cover crops and do some nitrogen fixing. I mean, we definitely have nitrogen, you know, have legumes in the soil at least once a year in our cover crops. But yeah, historically, we've been really laser focused on weed suppression, and then really just trying to make sure the timing works out for the following year, making sure that the cover crop can be incorporated so we can get seeds in the ground, and there's not a lot of debris inhibiting the seeders. And so our rotation looks like this. It's kind of like every 3 years we have land and cover crop, and we do field peas and oats early in the spring, and then in the summer we'll incorporate those, and we follow that with Sudan grass. And then the Sudan grass, we used to have a third cover crop in the fall, but we've noticed that the Sudan grass, sometimes we just had trouble, you know, incorporating the Sudan grass and getting a third cover crop in. So we've kind of turned to just like mowing the Sudan grass, and that either will grow back a little bit or it'll just kind of hold and keep everything covered. And now we incorporate that in the fall because it really hangs out in the spring, the following spring, and can sometimes kind of get in the way. So we've started to incorporate that a little bit in the late fall. And then the following year in the spring, we'll incorporate that again and plant it into vegetables for 2 years. We've really noticed that the Sudan grass adds a lot of kind of soil structure the following year. So even when it kind of gets in the way of the cedar, you know, and kind of clogs things up, there is sort of a benefit to adding some nice structure to the soil, nice aeration. And so for our amendments, kind of our mainstays have been the Giroux and sulfate of potash for potassium. And we use a cone spreader for the sulfate of potash, and then we spread the Giroux with the spreader. And then, yeah, kind of touching on reduction in tillage that I mentioned earlier. We, when I joined the farm back in 2003, 2002, we were using a rototiller and tilling up all our beds once or maybe even twice before we seeded. And I'm really happy to say, I mean, you know, we don't have that kind of sod. We don't have sod, you know, we're not turning over new land like the previous presenters. So we really don't need the rototiller, and I'm pleased that we have, for the most part, except if there's an emergency situation, which is rare, we've moved to using a field cultivator for prepping our beds. And so we use a Perfecta, and there's a picture of it there. And we used to stale seed our beds. Once we kind of moved away from the tiller, we moved into stale seeding. And so we would run the field cultivator. We would form a bed with a 6-foot disc harrow. and then run this cultivator over it to smooth it out. And hi, Ruth. And then we would run the field cultivator the following week, and then we would run it again in a third week before we would seed. And so now we've replaced that by, we form the beds with the disc, we cultivate it, and then we tarp. And so the tarping has really reduced the amount of hand weeding that we need to do later, and reduce the amount of times we're running over those beds with the perfecta. And I'm sorry to say I can't really track this, but we've definitely noticed an increased fertility with where we're tarping. And that's kind of been something we heard about and we're hoping for. And it seems as though that's actually the case, that maybe it's preventing nitrogen from leaching out. We're not exactly sure. Looking forward, hopefully, to have a little research done on that with a UVM student in the future to try to explain that. So that's kind of like our approach generally to soil health. And I can say the things that are, in general, our systems work really well for us. We do have a profitable farm, and the systems that we use are really pretty simple, and that is kind of our approach to our business in general, is having sort of simple systems that don't require lots of intricate planning, and do help us. We have a real focus on our farm of our quality of life as farmers and as not farmers, and being able to step away from the farm, whether it's in the off season or even at the end of the farm day. So our system really has facilitated that, and we have high yields and we have really good weed control, and those are sort of the focus for us. And this is kind of what we've been really looking at in the last few years, that what is not working well is that our phosphorus is excessive. And we have super high levels of phosphorus in all of our fields. And so this is something, kind of our perspective on this has changed in the last few years. There are a lot of assumptions that we had been kind of rolling with. And I did cover this already, but it's important, so I'm covering it again, which is that, we were kind of just going with the belief that there was no such thing as too much compost. And we also really believed that the phosphorus in our soils were legacy phosphorus from dairy farming that was on the land before us. We also believed that phosphorus doesn't leach through the soil, and also that we didn't really have any issues with phosphorus leaving our fields, because soil erosion's not really an issue for us. And I think we can say, like, all of these points have been debunked. Clearly, the Giroux and before the Giroux, the compost that we were applying, that was then intervale compost, we were adding more nitrogen than we needed, but along with that was like way too much phosphorus. We know now that phosphorus can leach through soil if it's very well drained, which ours is. And I think that we are losing phosphorus, not through like soil running off the field, but in flood events, of which we have more and more these days. That's a picture of me after moving a tarp with only one other person on a really hot day. But other than that, tarping's really fun. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of, you know, why we've been using the Giroux, and it's this is something I got from Becky's soil fertility workshops a few years ago, but it's a really great breakdown of the dollars per pound of nitrogen. This is a great source if you're trying to figure out a new fertility plan and you're kind of weighing out what you might want to use. But to me, it was like, oh yeah, definitely, it's hard to turn away from Giroux. You know, it's 67 cents per pound of nitrogen compared, and I have arrows pointing to some of the other things that we've experimented with and checked out. Peanut meal is, we really like the idea of peanut meal as like an agricultural byproduct, but it's super expensive. Soybean meal, the meals are a little bit slower releasing, and you know, they're these like bagged fertilizers that are just a lot more expensive. You know, the other thing we like about Giroux is it is a byproduct that's local, and so I don't know, it's just kind of it's worked well for us, but we are making efforts to experiment with other fertility sources. So I guess we used to use intervale compost before they moved out of the intervale and turned into Green Mountain compost. And that was in around 2012, I think it was when we switched to using Giroux. So we were getting 2 loads of Giroux that we would spread on our 8 acres. And we were probably getting about twice the amount of nitrogen that we really needed when you sort of do the calculations. Although, you know, we were also like double cropping much of our land. At least 2/3 of it, we were double cropping. So, you know, not sure we were like dumping excess nitrogen on or not. But if I just sort of calculated out like, well, if we used Pro Booster, for example, instead of Giroux, to get like half of the nitrogen that we were getting with the Giroux, that would be like $6,000 worth of Pro Booster for like, compared to the $2,000 we were spending on the Giroux. So, you know, I mean, when we started looking at this, we sort of balked at that, and we were like, where are we going to get this fertility in an affordable way? And we didn't really have a plan forward, but talking to Becky, we were like, well, let's just, you know, Becky was like, why don't you just, you know, try using less Giroux and see what happens. And so in 2019, actually, we did some experimenting, but we didn't do a great job of gathering a lot of data about yields, but we were kind of like, well, sort of seems to do okay if you apply less Giroux or apply Pro Booster instead. And so in last year, we just started by cutting our Giroux application in half. And then we, for our double cropped areas, for some of our double cropped areas, we applied Pro Booster. And so just have some of those numbers there. We spend, last year we spent a little over $800 in cover crop seed. I'm really keen to start experimenting with, we're already growing peas and oats every spring. And so I'm sort of like I don't think, I think that we could, spend less money and potentially harvest that nitrogen that we're already growing with cover cropping. So that is kind of goals for the future, is to completely eliminate the spreading of Demarest, and experiment with getting nitrogen from our cover cropping. Other things that I'm interested in exploring is, replacing that spreader, the manure spreader, and also the cone spreader with a little more of a precise tool, like a drop spreader. So that when we are, bringing, maybe we could get like Creers, how do you say that? Creers? Anyway, instead of Demarest, and do like a finer application, or, for like the early crops that, we can't necessarily like have a cover crop ahead of, or incorporate a cover crop in good enough time. Anyway, to sort of like look around for a better tool than the spreader. I think we could do a better job of, instead of just kind of like treating the whole farm as like the same, as, clearly like our mesclun doesn't need like the same amount of nitrogen as like some of the other vegetables. And so I think we could do a better job of amending by crops, or or organizing them into blocks. And I'm curious about potential ways to remediate the phosphorus, like in hedgerows or something, to keep it from running out of our fields in flood events. And so really the challenges to sort of making some of these changes are just that, I guess the culture of our farm is one piece of it, that kind of what we've been doing works really well for us. Obviously that's something that we can shift, but and I think, the urgency of the amount of phosphorus in our fields is will push us in that direction. It seems like there are a lot of unknowns of like how much nitrogen can be made available with cover crops. It's definitely less predictable, I think, than like adding amendments. And I see a lot of potential for like disrupting the timing of our bed making. And as we try different systems, we're really used to just like growing beautiful, perfect vegetables. So yeah, just like the trail and error involved in experimenting. You see my little typo there. In experimenting with cover cropping for nutrients does seem a little daunting, especially with, again, we're not always great at record keeping with experimenting. We're always happy to throw something out there and then we kind of forget what's going on, or, so we definitely need to tighten up our record keeping if we're going to start messing with our systems and changing things around. I think that's the end of what I had prepared.
Thanks, Hilary. Appreciate all the questioning. And just, as I really like the connection you're making between costs and fertility, and just a reminder that in this like world of water quality regulations in Vermont, the line in the sand is 20 parts per million of phosphorus. And if you're over that limit on your soil tests, you're really like obligated to be reducing phosphorus in the sense of like meeting crop needs. So that's kind of what our work is. And it's really challenging. And that question of like starter first phosphorus and costs is a big one. So really appreciate the work Diggers has been doing in that direction. And Zach and Betsy are going to talk a little bit about some of their resources, and they have specific funding to help farmers in the situation that I'd say Diggers is pretty on par with almost every other vegetable farm in the state that's been farming for more than 10 years, and especially using organic practices, so composts, manures. You guys are not alone. I'd say the bulk of large commercial farms in the state have high phosphorus levels. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and appreciate you sharing. There's lots of others out there. And just a reminder, I can share a little bit of this afterwards, but we do have this new Veg and Berry website with record keeping capacity that hopefully can help people with easy peasy record keeping. Take pictures of whatever you're doing, like whatever's in the field, and you can upload them onto this website. And that helps you with the RAPS compliance, and hopefully to share with your other farmers on your team or with us, whatever. So Zach, Betsy, you want to take it away and talk a little bit more about the nuances of all this?
Sure. So I'll go first. First off, I'd like to share a little bit about the work that I have done regarding, the economic impact. And it was cover crops and conservation tillage. And Kirsten and Workman and I did a project. And we started off by doing a lit review and just really digging into what information was out there and what farmers were reading and where they were getting the information that was helping them in the decision-making process. And what we found was there was a ton of material out there that tried to quantify everything from, valuing the soil that's lost through soil erosion and the added nitrogen through cover cropping. And after we looked at that, and then we came back and we're like, well, we don't think that given the size and the scope of the project we're working on, we're going to be able to quantify those sorts of things. So we were working with 3 case study farms. 2 were dairy farms. 1 was just a crop farm. And I will share a screen. We promised Becky we wouldn't fill this with spreadsheets, but I will share kind of a partial budget in what it looks like. And we decided to take that approach and really just look at it from the things that we could quantify, which basically became on the cost side. But anyway, so this is just kind of a basic partial budgeting tool. And, a partial budget just looks at those things that impact the change that you're making or the results of the change that you're making, the change in the inputs, the change in the outputs. So on one side, you have the increased income and the reduced costs. So those are your savings or where you're increasing revenue. And then the other side is the reduced income and the increased costs. And so from that perspective, we looked at on the farms that we were working with, and what we found was they were increased costs, not surprising, the seed, involved in the cover cropping. Planting, because they had to plant the cover crop, so that was an extra step. Termination, again, an extra step, although not in all cases, because sometimes they just did that. It was part of their normal spraying, so it wasn't really an extra step. Equipment modifications or new equipment, and that was pretty easy to track, fortunately. They either changed their corn planter or bought a new one or bought a no-till drill or things like that. And then the other things that we were able to put dollar values on was decreased labor. One of the farms we worked with in particular it was actually labor that they were hiring, so it was pretty easy to put a dollar value on that, which isn't always the case. The other 2 farms were family labor or one-man show, and so it was difficult to put a dollar value on that labor because it wasn't actual cash money savings. And then the other decreased cost was machinery cost, and some of that was related to fewer passes across the field as they weren't tilling. And some of that was due to the equipment that they were using didn't require as much maintenance as like plows and harrows and that sort of thing. But again, that got us a dollar value, but that wasn't the whole picture. And so then we had conversations about other benefits, non-monetary benefits. And the one thing that they all kind of came back to, none of them had great yield records. So we weren't able to track yield and say definitively that the cover cropping or these other practices were increasing their yields, but they did all have pretty good data on when they were able to plant the crop that they were trying to plant. And what we found was that it evened it out. The effects of weather on when they planted that crop, the main crop, was really the influence of weather was kind of taken out of the picture. They were able to get it in when they needed to get it in, regardless if it had rained, a bit really wet spring or something like that. And so that was really, on the yield side, like I said, they didn't have the numbers to support it, but we know that was a benefit. And I'm going to, so anyway, so this was a slide that I was working on, and I don't know if you can read it. I can't read it, but anyway, it just kind of shows the thought process in the different areas where decisions can be made. And it starts with what were the goals? Why are you cover cropping? Why are you moving to no-till? What are you hoping to get out of it? And then that influences the decision of how you do it and what inputs you need up front, what expenses you need out of pocket to even initiate that practice. And then there's the annual decisions. What seed are you going to use? What crop? How are you going to terminate? Those sorts of things. And then you get around to the evaluation, and how are you evaluating whether that was a good decision or not, or whether you want to change it up for the next year. And that's the piece that comes back to record keeping and being able to measure whether or not you got the impact that you were hoping. So that was kind of the lessons that we learned through that project. But going back to my work with farm viability and the whole business planning, initially when we start working with a farm, no matter what farm it is or what type of farm it is, we start with a SWOT analysis, and we really, dig into your business and see, what's working and what's not working. And, from there, we can identify areas for improvement or things that you want to do better. And it's really at that stage, then we move into, okay, well, what are the effects of if I implement this change? And then we would maybe go back to the partial budget, and we would say, if you do this, you could save this and increase this and hopefully have these benefits. But then there's a stage where it's implemented and nothing ever works like we figured it out on paper. So then that whole evaluation process is really important, and going back and looking and seeing what the effects were. And so this is where we really try to help farmers develop a record keeping system or a tracking method that, one, will get them the information that they need to make decisions on whether or not that was a good change or whether they need to try something different, but also something that they will actually use. And that's kind of the trick of it there. But it's, and we always try to tie everything back to the goals of the farmer, and not all goals are monetary. And especially when you're talking about cover cropping and no-till and, soil building and those sorts of things, we all know that it's not just a monetary decision. It comes down to, other external factors, sometimes, regulations, things like that, but also, our own values. And, does it fit in with the type of the farm that we want to be and the legacy that we want to leave? And Zach had some stuff on the decision making around capital investment, so I'm going to hand it off to him at this point.
Yeah, and just to follow up with Betsy, I'm going to place the link to our AgBiz page, to our website that explains all the areas that we work in. But yeah, as Betsy mentioned, we do have this business planning process that's pretty intensive over a 2-year period. And we realize that a lot of people don't have that time or energy or the ability to dedicate to that, however much we really promote it. So what we've been working on is, I'll share my screen. What we've been working on is something that just basically facilitates decision-making at a more of like a partial level, just like Betsy was talking about, like partial budgeting. Well, we can also, like what we find is entrepreneurs like this audience, you guys have a lot of ideas, and it's all, there, a lot of times it's in the head and you just can't get it out, or, or you don't get it out at all and jump into something and end up not feeling too comfortable after you jumped into it. So what we're working on here, and you can contact me if you're interested, is basically just doing feasibility study analyses at kind of like a narrative level, where you walk through a sequence, which you'll see on the left here, of sections that you walk through, and you just basically describe how you feel at this very moment for all these themes, with like when it comes to considering a new idea, like maybe an investment in a tractor, or who knows, like in equipment. So you just basically walk through these sections, your description of your idea, technology considerations. When I say technology considerations, it's like what are we planning on getting, like who's going to manage it, what do we need to learn to operate it. Marketplace analyses, is it going to positively or negatively affect your markets? Hopefully it's going to positively affect your market. Business strategy, is it how are you going to implement this and integrate it into your everyday business? Organization and staffing, are you going to need to bring someone on to manage it, or are you going to be amplifying your business so much that you need to hire someone? Your implementation timelines, financial projections, and basically like this, if it's gonna be able to be replicated within your business scenario. So we found that I've actually been bringing this along independently for the last 15 years in my business planning processes. And we find that, once everybody starts getting to the positive and very positive areas, then you feel more confident in moving forward for an expenditure or something else, that you're considering. And that may be the precursor to actually diving into a business plan, or jumping and going and getting a loan, getting a grant. And that's what our team really does. We like to support you in your business planning processes in the case that you're looking to make a big jump forward in some type of investment. So yeah, that's a little bit of what we're doing and what we're working on, and you'll hear more promotional material about this in the future.
Thanks, you guys. I don't know if there's questions from folks either about what you do or for any of our presenters overall. I mean, I think what sort of has gotten my head kind of spinning about this is kind of like what you guys were just addressing, like what are the drivers of soil health decisions, and then what are the outcomes? And I think record keeping is something that most of us don't love or have time for, or like Ryan was talking about this the other day, like when you're a small farm with basically 1 or 2 primary operators, you can't afford that time. So I think something I've been thinking a lot about is just simple ways to kind of at least track like the outcomes of these things. And I think we have these phones now, and you can just like take pictures that have a date and time stamp and go back and look at them. What are the simple ways we can do to understand what the results are of these changes? So I know you guys are there for free support for people, and that's probably between these 2 techniques, in the winter, setting up some meetings with you guys is really super helpful. So,
and I don't think Zach or I mentioned that we do have, I think they're business coaching clinics this last year. They came out of budget clinics, and then they were business clinics, and I think they're coaching clinics, we're calling them this year. But it's just 1.5 hour off meetings We usually do them late winter, early spring. Sometimes we do them in the fall if we're getting inquiries for that, but we always do them this time of year. And it's just a chance to just sit down and talk through some ideas without that, the huge commitment of signing up for a plan. And it, sometimes there's some follow-up, sometimes there's not. But it does allow us to reach a broader audience and people that we necessarily wouldn't talk to. And I do just want to say, Jenica mentioned something about being intentional, and that is one thing that we really stress in the whole planning thing is, know why you're making the decisions that you're making, and really be intentional about the changes that you make and why you're doing the things you're doing. And then it seems like from that, the ways to track it are more obvious.
Awesome. Thanks you both. I think if you want to plunk your contacts maybe in the chat so people can get in touch with you directly, and I can also share them on a follow-up email. On a kind of a tangential note, I noticed a lot of questions about tarping, and Hilary tried to address them in the chat, but she also has a really short video of moving the tarps around if people want to see that. And there is a lot of research right now doing on tarps or happening on tarps that I think is about to emerge in the next year or so in terms of the questions you're bringing up, Hilary, about nitrogen and nutrient availability. There's a project happening in Vermont with a graduate student at UVM, and then some folks up in Maine and Cornell. I did notice Cornell is offering like a very intensive free webinar series on tarps that I can also put a link to in the chat if you really want to get into it. I think they're like 6 workshops in a row. So do you want to share your video, Hilary? And in the meantime, if there's questions, keep putting them in the chat.
Yeah. So, oops. So, I'll just try to make this super quick, but we're always really careful to, when we're taking the tarps off, we try to make sure, so I put this in the chat, but our tarp lengths are about 80 feet, which is about half of a bed length for us. It seemed like our bed length at 165 feet or so is too heavy to move and too arduous, but we can easily run them up to the halfway point of the bed. As long as they're situated, it really helps to have them sort of piled so that what you're looking at, the leading edge here is the edge that's going to run to the halfway point of the bed. And so I'm just going to run it here. It seems like getting a little bit of momentum helps. And the other thing that really helps, and this is a shout out to Dylan, my farm partner. He was a physics major, and so he figured out that if we have a little bubble of air underneath that tarp, it actually pulls a lot easier than if you're getting all the friction of the tarp against the soil. So you also have to yell. So that's it. But it really is like if you're pulling that thing flat against the soil, it sucks. But getting a little air over it and running, and so that is, let's see, we have, I think that's 4 bed width tarps, so that's about 20 feet, and you've got 3 people that are pretty can move it pretty handily.
Thanks, Hilary. And it looks like some people are talking about using landscape fabric in the chat. I also think Ryan, who spoke last week, Ryan Fitzbeauchamp, different Ryan, talked about a woven polyfabric. I don't think it's exactly landscape fabric from Knowles. It might be the same, but I think it's slightly thicker or different texture than landscape fabric, and also easier to use and a little more durable. So I think there's pros and cons to each. That is for another webinar. But thanks, everybody. Thank you, farmers, for sharing, and Betsy and Zach for taking the time, and lots of thoughts on that. Oh, Kara is posting what I just tried to say better. A lighter weight landscape fabric from Knowles, ultra web ground cover. So thank you all. Be in touch if you have questions, and I'll send a link to the evaluation. And I think that's it. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.